Night in the emergency room. A nurse feels something isn't right. A dead man still breathing, just barely. She disobeys orders, takes care of him, and his pulse comes back. Within 48 hours, men with no names arrive, turn off the cameras, and demand silence. An unmarked ambulance takes him to a secret military base. Revealed. Before hearing this exciting story, subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss more stories like this. Let's begin. That night, the hospital felt quieter than usual. Outside, the rain hit the emergency room windows with a steady rhythm, while the white lights lit up the empty hallway. Sophia, a nurse with more than 10 years on the night shift, was reviewing patient reports when an orderly came in, pushing a stretcher covered with a gray sheet. Male patient, found unconscious, no vital signs, death confirmed, the orderly murmured, leaving the stretcher in the observation area. Sophia nodded, though she couldn't shake a slight unease. She was used to seeing death, but something about that covered body made her feel unsettled. She looked at the record, male, about 40 years old, found on a public road. Diagnosis: cardiac arrest, no response to resuscitation. The document was signed and stamped, stating no further care was needed. However, something caught her eye. The report was too short, missing the exact resuscitation time or the details of the procedures done. Usually, that information was recorded precisely. Also, the body hadn't been taken to the morgue yet. It was just lying there, in the middle of the room. As she walked past the stretcher, she felt a strange impulse. She stopped. The air seemed colder around her, but it wasn't just that. She sensed a presence, as if that patient wasn't completely gone. She lifted the sheet slightly to check if the face matched the report. It was a fair-skinned man with dark hair, tense features, as if he had fought before losing consciousness. The hallway was empty. Only the hum of a distant monitor could be heard. Sophia looked away, trying to convince herself there was nothing strange. He's dead. The document says so. Don't obsess, she thought. But she couldn't walk away. Something inside her, a gut feeling that had saved her more than once, was telling her this man shouldn't be ignored yet. There was no logical explanation, but the feeling was so strong it gave her goosebumps. Outside, the rain grew heavier, as if marking the time she had left to decide whether to act or to follow the protocol and leave him there. Sophia stayed at her station, trying to focus on other patients, but every few seconds she glanced at the covered stretcher. The hallway was dim, lit only by the soft light the hospital used in the early morning hours. The sound of rain mixed with the ticking of the wall clock, as if time itself was slowing down. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She walked over to the stretcher and, with a quick motion, lifted the sheet up to the man's chest. She just wanted to make sure that strange feeling was nothing more than her exhaustion playing tricks on her. In that instant, she heard it. A sound so faint it could be missed. A tiny sigh escaping the dead man's lips. Sophia froze. Maybe she had imagined it, but her instincts wouldn't let her step back. "Hello," she whispered, feeling a little foolish. No response. She leaned closer and heard it again, a short but real sigh. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked around. No one was there. She decided to touch his hand. She expected it to be ice cold, but to her surprise, it was still warm. Not the heat of a healthy person, but not stiff or frozen like a corpse either. She stood still for a few seconds, processing what this meant. The report said he was dead. Yet here she was, feeling that faint warmth on his skin. Her mind filled with questions. Did they check him properly? Was there a mistake? Why was he left here instead of being taken to the morgue? "This can't be," she murmured, pulling the sheet back a little more to see his face. The man remained still, eyes closed, but his expression wasn't fully relaxed. His brow was slightly furrowed, as if he were fighting something in his sleep. Sophia looked at the clock. It was 2:37 a.m. Just then, she heard distant footsteps and quickly pulled the sheet back down. The orderly walked past without even glancing in her direction. Clearly, no one was paying attention to this closed case. With her hands still trembling, she picked up the report and read it again. The notes were cold. No response to CPR. Estimated time of death, 0:48 hours. The document was signed by a doctor she barely knew. Someone who didn't usually work this shift. Something didn't add up. She leaned over the man again, this time placing her hand on his chest. She didn't feel a clear heartbeat, but there was a faint vibration, like something deep inside was struggling to come through. It was so subtle anyone else would have missed it. At that moment, Sophia knew she couldn't just leave him. She also knew that if she mentioned it to her superiors, they'd probably send her to do something else. Or worse, accuse her of interfering with a case already closed. But she also knew she couldn't live with herself if she ignored a sign of life. She took a deep breath, feeling she was about to make a choice that could cost her her job. The rain hit the windows harder, as if marking the urgency of the moment. Sophia stayed by the stretcher, trying to figure out her next move while the clock kept ticking without mercy. The clock read 2:45 a.m. The sound of the rain was still steady, but inside the ER, everything was wrapped in an almost uncomfortable silence. Sophia knew she shouldn't do it, that if anyone saw her, she could get into serious trouble. But she also knew that doing nothing would be worse. She took off the gloves she was wearing and reached for a new pair. Just putting them on made her feel like she was crossing an invisible line. She walked up to the stretcher and, slowly but with determination, pulled the sheet back again. First, she placed her fingers on the man's neck, right where the carotid should be felt. There was no clear beat, but she felt a faint, intermittent sensation, like a distant echo. Frowning, she moved to his wrist, pressing more carefully this time. There it was, weak and irregular, but alive. "My God," she whispered. She straightened up, looking both ways to make sure no one was watching. Then she went to the small supply room and grabbed a thermal blanket. She folded it quickly and came back. Placing it over him was instinct. Like warmth could call back the life that was slipping away. As she covered him, she noticed his skin wasn't as pale as she remembered. Not the healthy tone of a stable person, but there was a faint color she hadn't seen before. She took the manual blood pressure cuff she always kept in her pocket and wrapped it around his arm. The reading was weak, almost non-existent, but enough to confirm there was circulation. Then, with her stethoscope, she tried to hear something in his lungs. The air came in with difficulty, a harsh sound, but it was there. "If you stay like this, you're not going to last long," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Fear hit her. If someone walked in and saw what she was doing, they could accuse her of negligence or of going against direct orders. But in that moment, something made the fear fade. She had already made her choice. She would treat him as if he were alive, because he was. She leaned closer and spoke softly. "I don't know who you are, but I'm not going to let you die here, alone, under a sheet." She took a syringe from her side table and prepared a small dose of saline to hydrate him. She couldn't do much more without raising suspicion, but at least it would help keep his body balanced. Then she checked his hands and noticed his nails weren't bluish like in cases of prolonged cardiac arrest. Another sign there was still hope. Sophia felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. Hearing footsteps in the hallway, she pretended to be checking a supply cart. When the assistant passed by, she only smiled tiredly. The woman kept walking without noticing anything. Sophia went back to the stretcher and adjusted the blanket, making sure he was covered up to the neck. The thought of calling for help kept circling in her mind, but she knew that would mean losing control of the situation. For now, she had to keep it secret. She decided her next step would be to get oxygen, but she'd have to do it carefully to avoid suspicion. As she looked at him, a thought crossed her mind. If this is a medical mistake, I can save him. But if it's something else, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. The feeling in her chest wasn't just adrenaline. It was as if she were about to open a door she could never close again. Sophia knew that what she was about to do wasn't just risky. It was completely forbidden. The patient was already officially deceased in the records, and any intervention on her part could turn into a legal problem. But there was something stronger than the rules. The certainty that this man was still alive. She looked at the thermal blanket covering him and decided to add more warmth. She went to the supply room and grabbed another blanket, one of the thickest. She returned quickly and wrapped him carefully, leaving only his face uncovered. Cold is a silent enemy for someone in his condition, and she knew it well. The next step was to give him oxygen. Sophia went over to the equipment area and picked up a portable cylinder, the kind used for internal transfers. She rolled the cart slowly, so as not to make noise, and placed it next to the stretcher. "Don't worry, you're going to breathe better," she murmured as she adjusted the mask to his face. She turned the valve and let the flow start at a moderate level. She watched as his chest rose a little deeper with each inhale. It was slight, but enough to confirm there was a reaction. She decided to check his pulse again. Placing her fingers on his wrist, she felt it stronger than before. Still weak, yes, but with a slightly steadier rhythm. She couldn't help but smile in relief. "Come on, that's it, keep going," she whispered. At that moment, the sound of a distant monitor mixed with the rain hitting the windows. The rest of the staff seemed busy in other areas, giving her time to work without interruptions. With quick but precise movements, she checked his vitals again. Very low blood pressure, labored breathing, temperature just below normal. She decided the best thing to do was to keep him under direct observation, at least until he became more stable. She leaned in and spoke softly, almost as if telling him a secret. "I don't know who you are or what happened to you, but I'm not going to let you die here. Do you hear me?" She didn't expect an answer, but somehow felt her words might reach him. Several minutes passed as Sophia tended to small tasks, adjusting his position to help him breathe, making sure the blanket didn't let heat escape, and checking that the oxygen flow was steady. Each time she checked his pulse, she noticed a slight improvement. Still, she was aware that this change could raise suspicion if someone decided to check the body. She'd have to come up with a convincing excuse if she got caught. As she watched him, a troubling thought crossed her mind. If he was alive, why had they declared him dead? Was it a mistake? Or something else? And if it was something else, why was she the one to find him? Although still unconscious, the man seemed calmer. His breathing, though still irregular, was deeper than before. The color of his skin had taken on a slightly warmer tone, and that gave Sophia the strength to continue. "You're going to make it," she said, more certain than before. Still, she couldn't ignore the tension in the air. Outside, the storm wouldn't let up, and the hospital seemed wrapped in a strange stillness, as if all sounds were muffled. Sophia realized that by saving him, she was stepping into territory she might never return from. But there was no turning back now. She had chosen to care for this man, and she would see it through to the end. The night dragged on endlessly. Sophia had been by the stretcher for almost an hour, checking on the man every few minutes. The sound of oxygen flowing through the mask had become a steady pulse in the room, like a clock measuring the distance between life and death. While adjusting the blanket, she felt a subtle movement. At first, she thought it was just an involuntary reflex, something common in unconscious patients. But when she looked at his face, she saw his eyelids trembling. "Easy," she whispered, leaning in closer. The man slowly opened his eyes, as if every millimeter of the effort cost him. His pupils darted side to side, trying to make sense of where he was. His breathing quickened, and Sophia quickly placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, you're safe," she tried to reassure him, though she wasn't even sure it was true. He stared at her, as if trying to figure out who she was. His expression was filled with confusion, but also something else: fear and alertness. Even in his weakness, it seemed he knew that something serious had brought him here. As he tried to sit up, Sophia noticed something she hadn't seen before. While adjusting the mask, the blanket slipped slightly, revealing part of his chest. There on his skin was a strange mark, not a normal wound or bruise. It was a symbol, a perfectly shaped geometric figure, darker than the rest of his skin. It looked burned, but without swelling. "What is this?" she whispered to herself. He glanced down at the mark, then back into her eyes, and with a weak voice said something in a language Sophia didn't recognize. It sounded harsh, with short consonants and firm pronunciation. She frowned. "I don't understand you," she replied softly. The man spoke again, this time a little slower, as if trying to help her catch the meaning. But the words were completely foreign, not like any language Sophia had ever heard. "Don't push yourself," she told him. "You need to rest." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if surrendering to fatigue, but his lips kept moving, repeating those strange words over and over. It was as if he was trying to burn them into the memory of whoever was listening. Sophia felt a chill. That mark and that unknown language couldn't be a coincidence. The feeling that she was getting involved in something beyond her understanding grew stronger. She decided to cover him again and make a mental note of everything she had just seen and heard. She couldn't write it in the official report, but she could keep it in her memory, in case she needed to tell someone later. Before drifting off again, he opened his eyes one last time and whispered something else. A single word, this time almost pleading. Sophia didn't understand it, but she felt it, and knew it wasn't just a sound. It was a warning. Outside, the rain kept hitting the windows, but now the hallway was no longer empty. Footsteps, several, were coming closer. Sophia had barely had time to process what had just happened. The man had opened his eyes, spoken in a strange language, and had a mark unlike anything she'd ever seen. She was still watching him, trying to make sense of it, when the footsteps she'd heard in the hallway grew louder. Turning her head, she saw 3 men and 1 woman appear. They were dressed in plain clothes, but their presence left no doubt. They were not relatives, nor hospital staff. Their faces were serious, their movements precise. They wore dark jackets and tiny earpieces in their right ears. One of them, a tall man with very short hair, walked over to the control station of the room. "Turn off all the cameras in this sector. Now," he ordered in a deep voice. The security guard, caught off guard, hesitated for a second before complying. On the screens, the images of the ward went dark one by one, until only static remained. Sophia felt a knot in her stomach. "Excuse me, who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. The woman, her gaze firm, stepped closer and replied bluntly, "You are not authorized to ask questions. From this moment, this patient is under special jurisdiction. But he's stable. He needs care. And besides—" Silence. Another man cut her off, locking eyes with her. "From now on, you speak to no one about this." One of them pulled out a leather folder and began collecting every document related to the case. Reports, intake forms, anything that mentioned the patient. They even removed the stretcher's labels and ID bands. Sophia tried to protest. "That's medical information. You can't just—" "We can, and we will," the tall man said. "If you cooperate, you won't have any problems." Meanwhile, the woman approached the patient, who was now semi-conscious. He looked at her with a mix of fear and resignation. They exchanged a few words in that same strange language, making Sophia feel even more out of place. One of the men checked the oxygen flow and adjusted the mask. Another took notes on an electronic device that didn't look like hospital equipment. Everything they did was quick, as if they had rehearsed this protocol many times before. We need a secure space in this sector. No one enters without authorization, the tall man told the security guard. In less than 10 minutes, they had erased any sign that the patient had been admitted through normal channels. Sophia stood by the stretcher, unsure whether to move or stay still. Before leaving, the woman came back to her. You saw nothing. You heard nothing. Keep doing your job and forget what happened tonight. Sophia stared at her, lips pressed together. She didn't answer. She knew she couldn't promise that, but she also knew that if she confronted them now, she'd be putting herself in danger. When they left, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the air itself was thicker. The cameras remained off. The man on the stretcher was still breathing, struggling, but alive. Despite the threats, Sophia knew she couldn't abandon him. The question now burned in her mind, simple, yet dangerous. Who is he? And why do so many people want no one to know? The following hours felt endless. After the visit from those unidentified people, the atmosphere in the hospital changed completely. There were more security guards than usual in the hallways, and the area where the man was kept became almost completely isolated. Only Sophia had constant access to him, and it seemed to be part of an unspoken agreement. She would care for him, but under silent watch. Every time she entered the room, she noticed the patient improving a little more. The oxygen helped him breathe with less effort, and his pulse, though weak, stayed steady. Sophia wiped the sweat from his forehead, adjusted his blankets, and administered 4 fluids. She made sure he didn't have a fever and checked the strange mark on his chest from time to time. It was still there, unchanged, as if it had always been part of his skin. I don't know what they did to you, she whispered while adjusting his mask, but I'm going to keep you alive until someone explains what's going on. In his moments of greater clarity, the man would look at her intently, as if he wanted to trust her with something but couldn't say it. Sometimes he tried to speak, repeating those words in his strange language. Sophia listened carefully, memorizing every sound, even though she couldn't understand their meaning. Outside the room, the tension was constant. She could catch bits of conversation between the guards and the men who had arrived the previous night. Words like transfer, special authorization, and restricted area came up again and again. It was clear they were planning to move him out of the hospital, but no one said when or where. In those 48 hours, Sophia barely slept. She made quick rounds in the rest of the ER, but always came back to his side. She felt that if she left him alone, something bad might happen. On the night of the second day, as she was checking the oxygen flow, one of the men in a dark jacket walked in. He wore no badge or ID, but his presence alone commanded authority. Tomorrow, first thing in the morning, the transfer will happen, he said without greeting. You'll stay with him until then. Sophia frowned. Can I know where you're taking him? No, it's not your concern. He's my patient. Of course it's my concern. No more questions, he replied curtly before leaving and closing the door. Sophia clenched her fists, holding back her frustration. She didn't know if what they were doing was legal, but she was sure it wasn't normal. She looked at the man on the stretcher and saw in his eyes the same thought. He didn't want to go with them either. At midnight, one of the guards came in and left a bag of medical supplies. Orders from above. Keep him stable, he said, avoiding her gaze. She nodded silently. She couldn't stop thinking about the possibility that once he left, she might never hear of him again, and that worried her more than any threat she had received. During those last hours, Sophia made a decision. If they tried to make him disappear, she would at least leave some record of what had happened. She didn't know how yet, but she would. The rain, which had been falling since the night he was brought in, began to fade. The sky was gray, and the air colder. Only a few hours remained before the transfer. Dawn came wrapped in a strange silence, heavier than on previous nights. Outside, a completely white ambulance, no logos, no visible plates, pulled up in front of the hospital's side entrance. Two men got out and walked with firm steps toward the room where the patient was. "It's time," one of them said, looking straight at her. Sophia stepped closer to the man on the stretcher, who was awake and staring at her. She tried to smile to calm him, but she knew something was about to change for both of them. "They're taking you," she whispered. "Don't forget," he replied, in broken Spanish. While they secured the stretcher, another man turned to Sophia. "You're coming with us." She frowned. "What? Why?" "Orders. You have information and direct contact with the subject. We can't leave you here." Before she could argue, one of them took her by the arm. A chill ran through her. It wasn't an invitation, it was a direct order. In seconds, they had her inside the ambulance next to the man. Inside, it didn't look like a regular ambulance. There were metal compartments, advanced monitoring equipment, and internal cameras. One of the guards sat directly in front of them, watching without blinking. The door shut, and the engine started, pulling them away from the hospital. Sophia looked out the window. The city grew smaller as they headed toward a dark, unlit area. No siren, no traffic. Only the steady hum of the engine and the faint patter of rain against the body of the vehicle. After more than an hour on the road, the ambulance reached its first security checkpoint. A metal barrier, armed men, and towers with spotlights. Then, a massive gate slowly opened. Inside, everything was gray, with no visible markings. The air smelled of metal and dampness. One of the men spoke into a radio. "Base A-17. Targets delivered." Sophia swallowed hard. She didn't know what they were going to do with them, but she understood that what had started in that emergency room had changed her life forever. Still, she made herself a promise. Whatever happened inside, she would not forget. And one day, she would tell what she had seen. The cold of Base A-17 seeped into Sophia's bones from the very first second. It wasn't the cold of weather. It was the cold of a place built with no intention of comforting anyone. They pulled her out of the ambulance and led her down a long corridor, its metal walls lined with buzzing lights like restless insects. No one wore a name tag. No one smiled. Behind her, the man's stretcher rolled silently, his breathing measured by a machine that didn't look like hospital equipment. The air smelled of ozone, metal, and sterile precision. It smelled like secrecy. The corridors branched like a maze. At every corner, swiveling cameras and doors that opened only with black access cards. Sophia tried to memorize the route, but soon realized it was impossible. The place was designed to disorient. At last, they entered a wide room with no windows, a single fixed stretcher in the center, and a dark glass panel at the far wall. Behind that glass, shadows. People watching. People deciding. "She stays here," one of the men ordered, pointing to a chair next to the stretcher. "You'll do exactly what the doctor says. Not one word more." The doctor appeared in an unmarked lab coat, holding a tablet. His voice was low, trained to leave no trace of emotion. He examined the man quickly, like checking a machine before switching it on. Then he looked at Sophia. "You were the first to detect signs of life. You kept him going. I'll need him awake. I'll need both of you awake," he said, ordering a new 4-line, oxygen and blankets. Sophia complied. She knew she would do anything to keep him alive, even if fear gripped her chest. When she pulled back the blanket to adjust the cables, she saw it again, the mark on his chest. But now it wasn't just a fixed dark tone. It pulsed slowly, with a faint glow, like an ember refusing to go out. With each beat, the symbol seemed to shift, to settle into a final shape. Sophia swallowed hard. "What is that mark?" she dared to ask. The doctor didn't lift his eyes from the tablet. Not your concern. It's been my concern since the night they declared him dead, Sophia said quietly. The doctor paused. The shadows behind the glass paused too. Then he spoke as if dictating a neutral fact. It's not a tattoo, not a burn. It's a pattern. It responds to electrical impulses and changes in pressure. It responds to signals. The man on the stretcher opened his eyes, as if that last word had called him. His gaze found Sophia's. His lips moved dry. Don't forget, he said again, in broken Spanish. Without thinking, Sophia took his hand. She felt something she hadn't at the hospital. A faint warmth rising from his skin, like a soft current. The monitor showed a change. His pulse rose slightly, his breathing deepened. For the first time, the doctor looked at the data with real interest. Do that again, he ordered. Sophia squeezed his hand. The mark glowed a little brighter. It wasn't from the room's lights. It was its own light, a response. The dark glass revealed, for a split second, the reflection of a control room. Maps, signals, shifting lines. Someone said pattern match in a low voice, thinking no one could hear. What did they do to you? Sophia whispered to the patient. The man closed his eyes and spoke 3 short, clipped words in his language. Sophia didn't understand them, but the doctor did. His face tensed. He tapped his tablet twice. The door opened and 2 more people entered, carrying metal cases. They pulled out sensors, adhesive pads, and small antennas. Nothing looked like hospital gear. It looked like something from another world, or another level. They aimed the antennas at the mark. On the monitor, a pulse appeared. Not a heartbeat, but a code. One of the technicians looked up. It's answering. Answering what? The doctor asked. Something that's not here. The lights flickered. Once briefly like a wink. Sophia looked up. The hum of the lights shifted in pitch. The mark glowed brighter, then dimmed, as if it had spoken, and was now waiting for a reply. Minimal latency, the technician murmured. That came from nearby. The doctor turned to the glass. Close all communications. No one in, no one out. The door locked with a heavy click. Sophia felt the weight of confinement in her gut. The man gripped her hand harder. The warmth rose through her arm, and then, something impossible. A fine tingling spread across her skin, stopping at her chest. For an instant, she felt a warm point beneath her left collarbone. Instinctively, she touched it through her clothes. Nothing, but the tingling stayed. What's wrong with you? The doctor asked, suddenly alert. Nothing. I think, Sophia lied. The technician moved a sensor toward her hand. The monitor changed again. 2 lines now, a large one, the patient's, and a smaller, clear one, perfectly in sync but lagging by a fraction of a second. Sophia and the man connected. The doctor didn't hide his surprise. Resonant contact, he murmured. Wasn't in the plan. The dark glass lit up for a moment. A figure leaned toward a microphone. Doctor, accelerate the protocol. If there's resonance, the window is shorter. The word shorter hung in the air. The lights flickered again, this time longer. The hum deepened, like a low, sustained note. Sophia's skin prickled. The man's eyes snapped open, and he murmured something that sounded like a name. Then he looked at her, urgent. Don't fear, he said slowly, each syllable an effort. They're coming. Who? Sophia asked. No answer. Only signals. On the monitor, the code line surged. The antennas buzzed. A strange smell filled the air. Not disinfectant, not metal, but the charged scent of an oncoming storm. Sophia thought of that night at the hospital. Rain against the windows. She realized her fear wasn't of the man, or the guards, or the doctor. It was of what she couldn't see. The alarms blared all at once. First a deep tone, then a sharp siren, then a repeating message. Perimeter Security Level 2. Perimeter Security Level 2. The doctor looked up. Cut local power. Isolate the room. The lights went out. Only the faint glow of the man's mark remained, and a dim light beneath Sophia's collarbone, now clearly visible through her shirt. In the dark, the technician swore. "It's replicating." Sophia felt no pain, only certainty. The tingling became a soft pulse. The man squeezed her hand. The glass wall, once a mirror, was now a black lake. Behind it, footsteps, voices, orders, and a sharp, heavy thud, like a sealed door giving way. The siren's tone changed a third time. Internal incident. Immediate relocation. A cold wind swept the windowless room. The antennas bent toward the stretcher, as if pulled by something unseen. The doctor shouted an order Sophia couldn't hear. She only caught the word that had marked her life since that night. "Don't forget." But this time, it wasn't the man's voice. She heard it inside her own mind, in her own voice. The light at her collarbone blinked in sync with the mark on the man's chest. A single flash, a yes, and then silence. Not normal silence, but the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath before changing shape. The door burst outward, not with fire, but as if pushed by 1,000 invisible hands. The air rippled in waves. The glass turned liquid, revealing hooded figures with slanted visors. Their uniforms were unlike anything Sophia had seen. They carried no visible weapons, but the room obeyed their presence. The alarm stopped, and the monitors kept running as if nothing had happened. One approached the stretcher and looked at Sophia. They didn't speak with their mouth. The voice formed inside her mind. "Thank you for keeping him alive." The words drew themselves cleanly in her thoughts. "Who are you?" Sophia asked aloud, trembling. "Those who answer when the right signal is sent," came the reply. "The signal you reactivated." The doctor stepped forward, furious. "You can't take." He didn't finish. The hooded figure looked at him, and the doctor's arm dropped, as if he'd forgotten what he was about to do. The technician dropped the sensor, his fingers slack. It wasn't violence. It was pause. The figure touched the edge of the stretcher. The man's mark glowed softly, and the light at Sophia's collarbone answered again, like two notes of the same melody. The figure nodded beneath the visor. "She comes." "Me?" Sophia stepped back. "Where?" "Where this began," the voice that wasn't a voice said. "And where it ends." Sophia's fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became momentum. She looked at the man. He looked back, and for the first time, she knew he wasn't asking for help. He was inviting her. "Don't forget," she thought. "I won't," she answered without words. The hooded figures released the stretcher without a sound. An opening appeared in the wall where there had been none a moment before. Beyond it, clean darkness, free of dust, free of cold. A different air. Sophia met the doctor's eyes. He seemed small, unarmed, human. For a fraction of a second, she felt pity. She gripped the stretcher with one hand and pressed the glowing point at her collarbone with the other. She stepped forward. Then another step. The room stayed behind. Its muted alarms, false doors, and glass that no longer reflected. They crossed to the other side, and the world changed its light. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time!